We do have some time to answer questions. If anyone has any questions for anybody or any or all of us, we're happy to tell you what we think.
I just have one. It's a small question, but it's also very important, and it was kind of touched on a little bit. As you were saying during COVID, you were coming across a lot of this, and you were reading a lot of this, and it was taking a lot out of you. In the work that all of you guys are doing, what are you doing for self-care?
I'm looking for a new therapist, if you have any recommendations. I think that is a great question. I think for myself, I'll share a recent example. The month of April, which is our anniversary month, is always quite difficult. So I've tried to be less hard on myself for sleeping in, avoid not knowing what's up in the news and feeling like I have to be on top of that, because it is just quite distressing, especially with everything that's going on right now. And then on a serious note, I am looking, just to get back into a positive mental health discussion with a therapist.
I think one of the things Katie and I were talking about is watching puppy videos on YouTube is probably one of the first ones. I think that's how you get some joy in you real quick. No, but beyond that, I think, I just try to do things that are physical. I hike, I bike, I do yoga, and I fight. So I think there's a lot of things I try and do to externalize those kinds of emotions.
Yeah, I hadn't heard Christina speak before today, so, I appreciated that, Christina, you had humor in your presentation, and I think that in itself is kind of an illustration of coping, and you're coping, all I'm coping with is research and teaching, so, but similarly, I teach a course on homicide. I tell the students the very first day, we're not going to be moping for the next 4 months. We're not trying to live that way. I also have a toddler. She doesn't know anything about anything, so she's nice and innocent, just like the puppies. Other than that, but I guess I would also say, no one should put too much pressure on themselves, too much pressure to solve this problem. But having an opportunity, if you're a firefighter or a, EMT, you have an opportunity to go to work and try to save lives, that's exciting, not just distressing, at least for me.
Yeah, I think what everyone said is great. I think certainly having other outlets to make you feel comfortable with things, whether that is, having time to yourself to exercise, or for me, certainly having time with I have little kids, so having time with your little kids to, refocus yourself and to, have that sort of, obviously they're too young to appreciate any of these kind of things, so it's certainly, have a moment where you're not sort of focused on those kind of things. And I think also just sort of trying to make change where you can, and where it's overwhelming, take time to not do that stuff, right? I mean, certainly, it is overwhelming sometimes when there is a mass shooting and you get inundated with requests to do, interviews and other sort of things to comment on it, and maybe you don't want to do that day. It's definitely can be taxing. But I think, it's also, an opportunity to try to have a platform, try to make things better when you can. And I also think, over years, I think I'm pretty good at decompartmentalizing things and sort of, separating things in my life. So, but yeah, I think it's a challenge for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is for really all of you, but I think it most closely relates to a section of your presentation. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. In the blue shirt with the tie. Dr. Langford. The idea of not releasing the name does make a lot of sense, but what do you think is the risk of, especially in today's day and age, that creating kind of a different problem where a different crowd might come out and claim that that's like a conspiracy. It's like, why are you not releasing that? Maybe they don't want you to know that because that person is connected to X or Y group.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the work Eric and I have done really is we're not advocating for censorship or like a complete blackout of that name, right? It would still be in court records, it would still be available. So I would make the analogy to celebrity endorsement or celebrity effects, where it's like, if we stop giving these people Super Bowl level advertising, right? And it's just like, oh, it's a name out there if you want to look it up. I think that in itself would make a difference. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's like, let's scale it back, right? People pay $5 million for a 30-second Super Bowl advertisement because they want to reach a big audience in a big way. So I think, that's the easy solution. I don't know, Eric, if you have a thought to add.
Yeah, and I mean, it's true that you do get all sorts of conspiracy theories and stuff like that in the wake of these kind of events, right? Like Alex Jones and those kind of things denying that these things even occur. And so I think, you gotta, not succumb to that stuff. I think that's not necessarily a reason why you can not try to cover this stuff more responsibly. And that could involve a number of things, right? That's not only sort of not necessarily showing their names and faces, but also, being more thoughtful about the coverage that you have, right? There's a lot of research, even if you look at, for example, there's one study that looked at, if you cover stories about like the people who helped save the day in that event, like the heroes of a situation, actually people are just as likely to read those stories, right? So it's not necessarily that it has to be about that sort of salacious kind of details. And also, right, there's a lot of research that we know from how you cover suicides, right? And in the wake of trying to prevent copycats and suicides, and which a lot of it applies to mass shootings too, in terms of, the way that you glamorize things, the way you don't necessarily need to show it as a solution to things, and those kind of ways that you sort of portray it more responsibly. I think there's a lot of things you can do to really make it a safer way to cover things.
I'll just add to that in one of my classes, we contrast the attention that was given to the Parkland shooter's cell phone video or the Virginia Tech shooter's material that was published by NBC News. There's a video of the Parkland shooter after he was arrested, and he's sobbing in jail, And I think, like, if anything should be getting the attention, it should be that, right? Someone who just did something and is regretting the mistake, the unforgivable and unerasable mistake he made, so.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I want to thank you all for this talk tonight. It was incredible. I am the Washington State chapter lead for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I just wanted to mention that National Gun Violence Awareness Day is coming up in June, and there's going to be events throughout the Puget Sound. So you can go to wearorange.org, and also the Together We End Gun Violence Conference is going to be at Lumen Field, June 5th and 6th. It's going to be various violence interruption organizations. It's in partnership with the Seattle Seahawks. So for anybody that might be interested in getting more involved in the gun violence prevention movement, there are opportunities coming up. And being that you're here tonight, I just thought you might want to know more. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for coming. Thanks very much.
Is it on? This question is for Christina. Related to the risk assessment program that you were talking about, how averse or how willing to acquire these programs do you think governments are or school administrations are? To provide a little bit of context, what I'm thinking is if such programs exist and they miss this, it seems like it's a potential risk for governments and schools.
Yeah, that's a great question. In my experience, the establishment of threat assessment, threat management teams, it's really a community program. It's a local program. I mean, there are definitely government agencies and entities like the Secret Service and the Department of Education and others that do research and play important roles in it. But it's created and rooted and grounded at the community level. So a police department would have one, a workplace would have one, a school would have one in that way. And then hopefully there's information sharing, amongst those one individuals when there needs to be. So I think it's a very hopeful and one proactive approach in terms of looking at, all threats and all individuals that might come across that space. And it's really, the focus of the work is putting it in context, right? It's really just saying, based on what we know right now, it's really about how can we provide this person resources and care. And that could look like a lot of things. That could be counseling, that could be therapy, that could be having discussions with parents, and taking care of them in that moment. So part of the work is really just helping to ensure violence does not happen in that space. We have to remember most people do not become mass shooters. Right? This is a very, very small population, but there could be self-harm or suicide or other issues that could also be captured by these threat assessment teams. So I think any perceived, risk, hopefully becomes outweighed by the positive aspects of it. And it's definitely, if you look at states that have K-12 university school shootings or mass shootings, usually right after that follows a recommendation to create a program in the team, so such as Virginia, Connecticut, Illinois, Florida, and things like that. So it's a growing space. But I think the discussion of do we need to mandate it for it to be effective is a different one. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robin Evans-Agnew. I'm in the nursing faculty here, and I'm feeling I'm in a new place because I'm not sure. Are there any nurses in the room? Okay, there's one nurse in the room, so that's good. I feel more comfortable now. Fantastic to hear, and I'm working on our University of Washington Safety Committee. So, Christina, you said you did an assessment of us when you came. I'm really curious as to how we did. Just that this is an opening question.
Never publicly say I did an assessment. No, it wasn't an assessment. It's I've known your team at Safe Campus for some time, just through this work. And the University of Washington was very unique in that they created their program right around the time of Virginia Tech because there was a domestic violence incident, as you know, right before our shooting. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really interesting because a lot of places create threat assessment teams as a result of an attack, which kind of is the case here. But to have such a long history of doing this work and being so proactive about it, I think is great. Is there room for improvement? Of course, but.
Thank you. So my follow-up question really is to Dr. Gascoigne's comment on the Ila Vita shooting, that the kid had gone through 3 colleges, right? So my question is, what are we missing in terms of these promising young people that come through, and all of them that come through our doors I consider to be promising, right? And the ones who don't get in, who should be here, I consider promising. So what are we missing in terms of a safe campus? It is certainly a threat assessment, but it also seems to be some different sort of sensibility to who we are as human beings. And so my heart goes out to you too for sitting in COVID and thinking about this, because I actually think the pandemic has shaken things up a little bit for us to reconsider our values and what we talk about. And I'm so impressed, and thank you for that question about self-care and for the tenor of today's talk, because as a nurse, I can tell that you're taking good care of your community. So right on for that. I'm a public health nurse, but I'm wondering whether you could address, all of you could address, what are your deepest thoughts really about what we can do to be a safe campus here at University of Washington, Tacoma, and elsewhere?
That's a big question, right? You put us on quite the. No, it's okay. I will just say again, this is frequently talked about safety experts and practitioners, but it's connection. So in a school setting, often we talk about, being able to identify or just look at individuals that might not be fitting in or doing well or need some additional support. And so I think it really takes that community approach to make sure that we're watching out for everyone, that everyone feels like they have someone they can go to talk about any difficult issue that could be happening that's not violence related, and making sure that we're building communities that are kind, inclusive, and empathetic. And for me, I think ones that talk about safety issues, throughout the entire year and not only after something occurs.
If I could build on that, I completely agree. I think at least in the Isla Vista shooter's case, he was very well known to many different people that there was something wrong. He had spoken to a friend and admitted that he was thinking about doing something drastic. At the same time, he had multiple encounters with law enforcement. He was in mental health counseling. He had, mental health medication. So there was a lot of things that were in his life that were meant to sort of serve to address a lot of the problems that he was confronting. But at the same time, I don't think that there was any one person or any group of people sort of looking at all of the challenges that he was confronting. He was, really a Southern California kid, driving sometimes 40 minutes and crossing multiple towns just in the course of his normal day. So no one could sort of see everything, the forest for the trees. No one could see the whole picture. So if there was someone there assessing, like a whole team of people sort of keeping an eye out on his behavior and sort of tracking his progress and seeing the escalation, I think that would make a huge difference in preventing the attack, right? Because again, police officers did come to his home. His mother was aware. She was among the people who was calling attention to his increasingly disturbing behavior, but because there was no network, there wasn't the proverbial village, he eventually just was on his own and fell through the cracks. And I think part of it was also that he's older, right? A lot of the school assessment efforts at the school level are catching students at a time when they're much more surrounded by the community and figures of authority.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I'd say, I've done a lot of research on averted incidents of school shootings particularly, looking at why sort of a plot or plan to bomb or shoot up a school was prevented, right? And what we found, similar to what Christina pointed out, right, there is often this leakage. It's very common in the vast majority of cases where someone threatens other people, they tell other people, don't come to school that day, or they try to, recruit other people. They sort of have lots of ways where they tell other people that an impending attack is coming. And so the best way to prevent that, and there's a lot of research, right, that it's having a sense of community. It's having a positive school climate where people feel comfortable coming forward. They feel like the adults in the building, the staff, or the teachers, the other sort of administrators, people in the building they can trust and come forward to if they have been exposed to threats. That's really sort of essential. And that's really what averted the sort of the vast majority of the cases that I looked at. It's a little more difficult, right, if you're talking about a college setting than a high school setting, because you don't have exactly as Dr. Gascon mentioned, right, it's not the same kind of support networks and sort of people in place to build that. But definitely, I think across the board, this sense of community, a sort of positive school environment where you have an atmosphere where people are comfortable coming forward, that's important, not only for reporting things like school shootings, but also for bullying and experiences of domestic violence and sexual, all sorts of kind of problems. People are more likely to report if you have a positive sort of school environment.
And Eric, can you say anything about why people don't report? Because in some
sure,
sense, maybe
yeah.
To me, and Christina, I'd be curious about your opinion as well. The thing that's most infuriating for me is when it's like, this was preventable, right? Somebody knew, and all they had to do was come forward with this information, and we could have gotten this person help, and they don't. So, Eric, from a research perspective, you might have a sense of why that is, but also, I guess I'm curious how you feel about this. Because maybe, I don't know, it's not your responsibility to fix everything, but I wonder if people would be more receptive to hearing that from you, that they need to get over whatever's stopping them from reporting something that could save lives.
Yeah, I hope they're more receptive. I have spoken in front of high school audiences. It's one of the more nerve-wracking audiences, right? Because they can kind of call your BS. well, and just like staring. But yes, that is one big goal and reason why I do this work, right, is to hopefully prevent, whether it's from a threat assessment or campus safety lens, or from an actual student kind of speaking up and things like that. And there have been stories, people afterwards have come up, and I don't know if we prevented mass shootings, but we've hopefully gotten help for individuals. I think the reasons for not reporting are, obviously quite vast, depending on people, but often it's people maybe don't know what's going to happen with that information, right? They don't trust that it's going to be handled appropriately. They're often reporting about their own friends, so they fear someone finding out. So you have to kind of stress, that it will be anonymous, your identity will be protected, that you're doing a greater good. And I think when people see survivors and victims, it's like, yeah, they can put a face to someone who they hopefully are helping save or help save from an experience in that way. But I think what I would love to see is just more of those stories about prevention or averted acts being really talked about, and in interviewing some of those folks that were able to step up and talk about this exactly the same way as you. It really is painful to see how sometimes quite visible how potentially easy it would have been to stop that, or to at least get someone help. One of the cases that I showed in Maryland involved a parent who turned in his daughter, and I will one day track down that gentleman, because I think that's a really interesting and really painful conversation to have, right? She had very outlined plans about bombing her school. But I think what I've read and also kind of seen is when students have concerns or think someone is kind of up to something, they call their parents or they talk to their parents about this. I have friends who, during the shooting at Virginia Tech, they were not near the actual building, but called their parents who were 4 hours away to kind of say, like, what should I do? And their parents are like, just get away from the campus, basically. So, in some ways, I think, we have to tackle this at school, at work, but it is also a family issue, and making sure that parents talk about this, even though it can be pretty scary thing as well. So that was a long answer to your question. Dr. Mathis?
Yeah, so I will talk. There definitely were cases, and there have been a number of cases, Parkland mass shooting is one where there was tons of sort of leakage, tons of examples of things that came forward that should have been able to be prevented and then didn't happen. But in my research, right, I looked at a lot of cases where, there was leakage and like, one example where there's like, I think 18 students who had heard about the threat, who had been exposed to the leakage, who knew that this kid was planning something, and only one kid came forward, right? Like, and there's a number of cases where there's like, there's and that's sort of still considered an example of like a successfully averted incident, right? Where there was that many people who knew about it, but then didn't say anything, and you had a few people who did and came forward, and that's why it was averted. And also, right, in the majority of cases, right, it was people who were either threatened or they were like, acquaintances. It was extremely rare that it was someone who was like a close friend who informed on the person who was planning the attack, and that obviously is more difficult, right? And part of that is it's about sort of bystander impacts. People might think it's not real. They might not think that minimize it or things like that, and maybe But I think it's also like a what called like a code of silence, where students sort of feel like snitches get stitches, and that sort of is prevalent. And so I do think, again, it's really important to move away from that kind of a culture. And again, there's a lot of research that shows the best way to do that is to have this environment where people feel comfortable coming forward to break through that kind of code of silence. And make it where people are able and not fear that they're going to get in trouble themselves, which is sometimes a problem with like zero tolerance policies and stuff like that. So I think that kind of having an approach where you're holistically having a sense of community is really, really crucial.
Just curious if there's a 1-800 number that exists in any state or nationwide, right? We just recently had a mental health crisis line to anywhere to report something like that.
You can report to the FBI by calling them or through their website. I think it's like FBI Tips, something like that. But I think I'm not aware of a 1-800 on the local level.
This one specifically for this, right? Because then it would, instead of getting like the fire station gets a phone call, the principal gets it, right? Then it's that disconnect. And if there are 3 reports on one person, if that all was received on one line, that's higher priority.
Yeah, and there are anonymous tip lines that schools and colleges have and things like that, that are anonymous, and there's even sort of automated versions of those. I know Christina has worked on that kind of stuff, which definitely plays a role for sure.
Yeah, we have create an app called Live Safe, which you can download, which is used by college campuses and other companies. So a lot of states have their own kind of branded reporting apps for that state. Colorado was one of the first ones that created theirs as a result of the shooting, the Columbine shooting that they had. You really do want to report it at a local level, though, because when you go up to a larger level that's not connected to that space, it's very hard for them to keep track of all those different cases, especially because they may not have the time to do those investigations, right? Depending on what's happening in their lives. The FBI gets involved in only a certain type of case. So I think, in your example, it sounds like you're a nurse, it's HR, right? And or security. And I think one of the most important things to do is to document that and to take some notes, even for yourself. Because often it is a sense of kind of following up, and if one day you get a call from an investigator who works for the system or wherever you work for, they need to, have some information around how long have we known about this, who did you tell, things like that. Not to build a case against the person, but just to have more context. What usually happens is that no one calls, no one tells anyone, and by that point we've let the behavior go for 10, 15 years, and everyone's afraid of the individual and they want them out. But you can't just fire someone because they make people feel uneasy. And so really early reporting, early intervention, I think is the best case. And I would say if you feel like you probably don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but if you feel like your information is not being heard or not being received, keep pushing it, keep going higher. Because I think at the end of the day, if other people are noticing that this person is just making you feel nervous or whatever it is, unwell, then some attention needs to be given, some resources might need to be given there. Is that helpful?
Thank you so much. So thank you to all of you for this really wonderful presentations. So this is a question for any of the panel members, and the common themes that have come up in some of your presentations, Dr. Langford, you mentioned about the poll that, the agreement among many Americans about, individuals who, we can flag them for self-harm or interpersonal harm, or Christina, you mentioned about parents who have stepped forward to report their child. So I was wondering, in your communications and interactions with community members or school authorities or others, what is your sense of their awareness or willingness to, in states that have ERPOs, extremist protection orders or red flag laws, to do one of those, to petition the court as a household or family member or law enforcement to petition the court for firearms to be removed? Can you talk a little bit about, does it even come up? Do people even know about them? Do you feel like there's a sense of awareness about them? Would be great to hear.
Yeah, I think we're kind of just getting started on that. So increasingly, just in the last few years, I think more people have learned about those laws and those options, but not nearly enough. And, denial is so powerful, right? So if you can convince yourself that it's a nothing, there's just like a long list of benefits to that verdict, right? Don't have to get involved, don't have any responsibility, don't have to worry about trusting this person I'm close to. Whereas if you get involved, then you may feel the burden of responsibility is on me. How do I articulate my concerns to this person who may think I'm overreacting? Some of the code of silence things that Eric mentioned as well. And then I guess beyond that, we have different states with different laws, different people who can petition for firearms to be removed from the house or purchase prevented. And then, but again, like the research is really kind of in its infancy, but at least anecdotally, law enforcement itself varies in its support of these laws. So there are at least quotes from law enforcement officers saying things like, I don't think it's right to remove someone's gun because they won't have the ability to protect themselves, so kind of in violation of their own state law. So it's a challenge, but I think we are educating people and moving in that direction.
And I think it is an area where there's quite a lot of cross-partisan support in a lot of ways. And Washington is an interesting state example because we have, right, extremist protection orders, but we also have like a juvenile version, right, in Washington state where if a juvenile sort of goes under this process, they can have their guns, their parents, they not access to their parents' weapons, which is an extra step that Washington has. That's fairly recent, right, legislation. So, yeah, but and I don't know if you much research on that. I know you know better than I, but I think that's definitely, yeah, it's an interesting area of that needs more research and advocacy too.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think reassuring people that these laws won't be abused, that there's checks and balances, that someone who filed a false report could face significant legal consequences themselves, that it's subjected to judicial review, all these kind of things are important in reassuring people essentially that, that the laws of the land regarding the Second Amendment won't be just thrown out, so.
Hope you guys don't mind me asking a bunch of questions. This question's for Dr. Langford. Seems like you have the most statistically and scientific approach to this. This one may be a little bit more of a controversial question, especially us being in this country and with our Bill of Rights. It's not the Second Amendment, it's actually the First Amendment. The First Amendment, obviously the freedom of free speech, it could often sometimes be translated and it could turn into a slippery slope. It could sometimes turn into not just freedom of what we say, but freedom of what we worship, what we do, where we're at, and often what we do. And sometimes it could turn even to something physical. And it's us being in this country, I think the freedom of speech, the First Amendment, probably makes Americans even more individualistic than the rest of the world. It's especially in many Asian countries and a lot of European countries, they probably tend to lean much more towards being collectivist, and much more of those people act a certain way. And I think that's one of the reasons why they have less mass shootings, and they tend to just be more like penguins or ducks in a row. So that's so that kind of leads into the question, do you think our First Amendment, our freedom of speech, our individualistic society, that culture, do you think it kind of feeds into do you think it's a causation to people to act in violence, feed into this mass shooting? Do you think it's a statistically significant causation to all of these statistics? It sounds like a simple question, but it's definitely a loaded question.
Yeah, I think, first of all, as I mentioned, there's some things that are really easy, some data that are really easy to code for a bunch of different countries, right? And then when you talk about coding culture, that's much more complicated. Now, when you talk about individualism, I would link that to fame-seeking and fame-seeking at any cost. There are cultures where self-promotion is considered distasteful, even shameful. We left that behind a long time ago, right? Now it's almost like you are an idiot if you're not self-promoting, right? It's almost like a cultural value. Like, where's your, instead of not just your business card, like, where's your branding, right? In fact, I think a university that I might work for has like a seminar or something on how students can build their own brand, right? So yes, there's a ton of stuff going on with individualism that is probably part of this problem. And with regards to freedom of speech, I think it's complex to think about how does freedom of speech linked to individualism, linked to people saying outrageous things and then doing outrageous things. I think that's pretty hard to untangle, but certainly interesting. Yeah, well, you know, people could potentially write manifestos in any country, right? There is a big debate about publishing them or not. And you know, there are also things like Son of Sam laws, you know, which relate to profiting from something you've written related to criminal behavior. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting issues there. But I wouldn't say it's something that's been rigorously coded globally yet.
You didn't talk too, none of you really talked too directly about social media and its impact here. I don't know if you were trying to like kind of intentionally stay away from that, but like what are your thoughts in general about its impact, you know, particularly on the fame-seeking thing?
Yeah, I'll just mention, so it is true, one of the chapters actually in the book talks about sort of social media and those kinds of other ways that people call like micro-fame, the way people get fame rather than just sort of national platforms and things like, you know, national news media, but through, you know, social media and other kinds of forms, and so how that can play out and still be problematic, even if you don't give them national coverage, how they can make their own. And there's definitely like an issue with, you know, school shooter fan bases and websites that glamorize this stuff online. There's global versions of this. There's not only in the United States, but there's big ones in Europe and other parts of the world too. And so yeah, that is a persistent issue too, for sure. That even if you don't necessarily publicize it through the national media, that they can still have that micro fame through other resources. And yeah, and I think that obviously like issues of like content moderation and all those kind of things are hot button issues that are nowhere close to resolved. So yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Eric said. I think it can potentially worsen the problem. I mean, specifically with respect to the incel movement, I mean, it's what makes it kind of an international phenomenon, right? And it kind of feeds on itself, right? People who are sort of justifying violence on for the purposes that Elliot Rodger and some of these other guys set out. That's where they go and seek support, right? That's where they go and sort of find voices who are feeling the same kinds of pain and encouraging that kind of action. And it's also where they have, as Eric was saying, sort of gone on to achieve a sort of notoriety. Like people consider Rodger a saint. You know, they talk about him in those terms. They talk about him in terms of a martyr. They say he's been canonized along with some of these others. It's like disgusting to think about how venerated some of these people are. Their actions are sort of considered, you know, something to be upheld and admired and replicated. And all of that language sort of exists in that online space, right? In all of these different formats. So I think it definitely has the potential to sort of worsen the problem. Exacerbate the problem.
All right, if there's not anything else, I think, yeah, go for it. All right, yeah, I think one more, and then I do think we have to close it. Yeah, thank you.
I just have a suggestion. We have a Supreme Court that seems to be thinking that they have to interpret the Constitution as it was intended at the time of the writers. So what it was in the mind of each of the writers when they wrote that phrase? It was a man with a flintlock rifle. And so I think everyone is legally entitled to have as many flintlock rifles as they want, but no weapons that were invented after the original Constitution was written.
Great, thank you. No, and I think on that, I think we'll close out. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all our speakers and for all the foundations that helped made this possible. Thank you to the Vadhoyer Foundation and the Koshka Foundation. Thank you to the School of Social Work and Criminal Justice. And thank you all for coming and talking about such a important but distressing topic for quite a few hours. So thank you all very much. Really, really appreciate it.